Welcome everyone to our last panel discussion for our Inclusive Financial Regulation and Supervision stream today. And I say today because tomorrow we'll have more discussions under our Inclusive Financial Regulation and Supervision stream for Pathway to 17 Summit. Today we'll be discussing RegTech and SupTech and its potential benefits for regulatory reporting towards building an evidence base for effective policymaking. And we have Galina Carroll from Toronto Centre with us today. And I'm not sure if this is Sarah Sinclair that's joining, but we've also joined by Sarah Sinclair, who is the co-founder of Change Gap. And we've got really good experts here to discuss some important topics with us around how we can see the developments that are SupTech and RegTech touching the inclusive world of regulation and supervision, and how those can help them facilitate in a more innovative environment because it's enabled by financial regulation and supervision. So before I ramble on and on, let me allow Galina and Sarah to briefly introduce themselves, and then I'll jump straight into my questions. Galina?
Thank you, Nolwazi. So I'm Galina Carroll. I'm a regulatory economist, but I've also been a director of forensic accounting. I've worked in a law firm, worked for regulators, worked for regulated entities. I am really interested in how technology can enable better regulation and supervision. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what we can all discuss and how we can all make things better through intelligent use of technology for supervisors. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you, Nolwazi. This is an amazing initiative, all the work you've put into this, and such an important set of topics. So really privileged to join you in this series. Thank you. So I've got a computer science background, and then followed 25 plus years in contracting and consulting engagements in financial services, mainly, and mainly within regulatory technology and change. So having started in technology and then being on the business side, that put me in quite a unique position, being able to understand both sides. And here we are talking about the potential of technology, RegTech and SupTech. So yeah, really excited about this discussion today.
Great, thank you so much, ladies. And if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or the questions. I have my eye on the live discussion, so I will have sight of your questions to pop them up to Galina or Sarah during our discussion. I do have my own prepared, so I will be asking them of Sarah or Galina. And by all means, if I have a question for Galina and you want to add to it, Sarah, please feel free to do so. And likewise, Galina, if I have a question for Sarah that you'd like to add on to, please do feel free to do so. So I'll start with you, Galina. We've seen that financial authorities are increasingly relying on technology such as AI to support their supervisory functions. But this now is creating outsourcing needs for certain functions for these financial authorities. Can you identify some of the risks and concerns this outsourcing introduces, and how can financial authorities mitigate against these risks?
Thank you for the question, Nolwazi. I'd like to point out that outsourcing is not necessarily new for financial authorities, but the scale and type of outsourcing might be new, and that might be what is causing concern for some financial authorities. I'd also like to point out that outsourcing by financial authorities poses similar risks as those faced by financial services providers, and they center around operational risk, cyber risk, contractual risk, and business continuity risks. Therefore, authorities, like financial services firms, probably need to do some of the following to mitigate those risks. So they need to have in place a robust risk management and control framework. They need to have a solid business continuity plan with regular stress tests around service delivery, failovers, fallovers, and the like. And within that, they need to have a robust IT services strategy, which is linked to the overall strategy for the financial authority and to its business continuity plan. The other thing to think about is the life cycle of outsourcing. For financial authorities to think about the due diligence needed beforehand, the market research of potential providers, and then once things are in place, to consider essentially a portfolio management of outsourcers. The final thing would be for me about training your people, your supervisors, your policymakers, your operations and your IT team, and your senior executives, because outsourcing is not some small thing that is off to one side. It's actually a core element of going forwards of what a financial authority needs to control. And so I'd say that, you know, if I'm going to be honest, this isn't a geek issue, right? In the past, it might have been seen as something that was over there. But, you know, from my experience of working in internal audit in a financial authority, you really have to have an understanding of the outsourcing elements and just put together some solid plans, because for financial authorities, what we're looking for is often very similar to what we ask of regulated firms. Sarah, I think given your background, you probably have quite a good few things to add on that topic.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think, sorry, I realized I didn't have my setting correct, so I've just fixed that. So basically, I think, you know, you're right in terms of risk management, and you know, third-party risk management is you know, such a hugely growing area. But one of the challenges, I guess, is understanding the risks, right? The new risk profile, and that's really difficult. And we're going to touch on that in some of the later questions. So I think you know, you can't suddenly onboard all of that knowledge overnight. So a key thing is partnerships and having access to people, partners, organizations where that knowledge resides, and you can you know, quickly understand it enough to sort of frame those risks and then put in proportionate controls, you know, to mitigate.
Yeah, and I think standard setting bodies and, you know, peer financial authorities can share that and do share their knowledge, which makes it really helpful for financial authorities who are at the beginning of this journey.
Yes.
So
absolutely.
yeah, and I think you're right. It's not an all, you know, like, boom, you can suddenly know about the risks. It's a learning journey, and I think you're right. Partnership is crucial with industry and with other financial authorities.
Yes, and within organizations.
Yeah. Thank you, ladies. I think we'll circle back and everyone will see why I started off on this question at the end. I'll try to make sure we keep it within our time. But moving on to that, I want to start on continue with Galina before I get to Sarah's technical questions that will get nice and a bit complicated maybe to a few people, but hopefully not. Recently, in a report from the FSB, they state that a confluence of drivers has led to the development and application of SupTech and RegTech tools and methods. So my question to you, Galina, is that in your opinion, what are the key technological policy and drivers of RegTech and SupTech developments, both from the supply side and the demand side? So this is asking just from your opinion.
Well, I mean, what I would say is the FSB report from October 2020 had some great insights, and I really recommend to viewers to read the use of supervisory and regulatory technology by authorities and regulated institutions by the FSB, because they talk about, you know, demand drivers being increased volume and complexity of regulations, how hard it is for supervisors and supervised firms to keep up, the velocity and volume of data becoming available, and the larger numbers of supervised entities. So the demand drivers are really centered around, it's too much. So how we supervise must change because who we are supervising is also changing. In terms of supply side, the FSB talks about the availability of new technology, artificial intelligence, machine learning, new and better infrastructure and architecture, and the cost reductions that could arise from that. Also, it talks about, again, data availability. But if I'm talking personally, I would see there being three key drivers, and they're as follows. The first one would be momentum. More authorities are getting involved in SupTech, and they're sharing their experiences and refining their use cases. So this constructive sharing breeds momentum, and I think is supporting the uptake of RegTech and SupTech, both on the demand and supply side. Secondly, I think confidence is a key driver. It's now normal for financial authorities to be talking about RegTech and SupTech. We're fairly confident doing this, even if we are in an authority that is at the beginning stages of this journey. And we can forget how quick a journey this has been. You know, for example, it was only in 2016 that I was working in the FCA, and we launched the first tech sprint by a financial authority in the world. Now it's part of the vocabulary, and that's only in a few short years. Final thing that I think is a key driver of RegTech and SupTech developments is discussions on data standards. We really need an agreed set of data standards for regulatory reporting, for machine readable regulation, and a host of other SupTech uses. And ESG is just the latest example of where we really need agreed data standards.
Thank you so much, Galina. And I think leading on that, I'm coming to you, Sarah. So I think what you want to add, you can start with it, because I'm coming to you on the question on the technologies of SupTech and driving SupTech and RegTech. The innovate is one of the technologies, AI and machine learning. And can you talk to us about algorithm bias? So why is it important for financial authorities to avoid it in their RegTech and SupTech solutions? And whilst we're on it, can you talk to us about the algorithm explainability and non-explainability debate? So I think you can add on to what you wanted to add on from Galina and then answer that question.
Yeah, no, this is amazing. I love the questions because and the thing is that there's so many interconnections between them. So you know, it's interesting because you know, I didn't know exactly what Galina was going to say, but the things you know that you mentioned were like pretty much my list as well. You know, the importance of data standards, and I think, you know, going back to what you said about the speed in, you know, with which things have developed, that's incredible, and that means it's even more important that you know, we do what we can. So we may not all be technology experts, but we can have a good handle on our business and our supervisory obligations and what we need to do, want to do. You know, what's the ambition? Because unless you know that and can articulate it clearly, then what technology solutions are you looking for? So yeah, really, really important point. So going on to the AI, so algorithm bias. Now, whenever someone mentions bias in whatever context, I don't know about you, but it feels like there's a sort of negative connotation in there. I think, you know, one of the first things we need to do is realize that there's a natural bias, you know, and it's about understanding what the bias is in any given context. And in the context of algorithms, you know, there's many good examples out there of bad algorithms and the impacts that it's had on either members of the society or organizations. So you can't help bias, but you can understand what the algorithm is there to solve, and then, you know, looking at the results of the algorithm and the gap between, and then the steps towards closing that gap. So you need people with different disciplines, you know, that can understand various aspects of it and then work together to help plug that gap. So in terms of how to avoid it, I don't think you can avoid it totally, but you can minimize and mitigate it by making sure that you have the ability to understand it, that it's clearly documented, and that the right people are around the table, you know, having the conversation towards mitigating it in the first place and then maintaining that position. Yeah, and then communicating clearly at all levels of the organization, internally and externally. So explainability is, you know, in what I said there. So I think a lot of people are frightened of AI and algorithms, and it's probably like I'm frightened of accounting because I don't understand it. Whereas, you know, people are sort of frightened of IT when they don't understand it, and the same with AI. So explainability is a key way, you know, to mitigate. I think it can be a prevention control, in terms of, you know, if you're saying to people coming in or, you know, in the building already to create algorithms, then they know they're going to have to explain it at the end. So the chances are they're going to, you know, put in the controls and quality all along. So that's the prevention side. But then also, like, you might design an algorithm and make sure that the bias is a minimum. But then, you know, there could be a natural shortfalling, you know, despite the best planning and execution, there could still be an issue. So you need to be ready, you need to have the people to be able to dive in and explain something that perhaps was unexpected. So it's quite a long answer. I hope that that gave a good view.
I loved that point about explainability, because you're right. You know, at any point in any meeting, there's always going to be something which is raising the fear index in parts of the audience, and the explainability is just key. So I love that point.
Yeah, and also what makes sense to one person or group might not to
Yeah.
another. And you know, there was a quote on a panel last week I was on, and they said data quality actually it's not that it's good or bad, it's just you need the context. And I think, you know, even more so with AI, you need to understand the rationale and the meaning.
So I think this leads me nicely to my next question to Galina, which is on that sometimes subtext strategies fail to clearly articulate the problems that they're trying to solve or set unrealistic expectations. So in your opinion, what are the most important considerations for devising adequate subtext strategies? So, I mean, people are out here creating solutions for problems that don't exist.
I think one of the big issues for me is, what is the purpose of this subtext strategy? Before we get stuck in the weeds, let's bring it right up and be clear on what the goal is for that strategy.
Yeah.
And to align that with the financial authority's overall vision. Otherwise, there's a risk that you're going to have a string of ad hoc projects that are really interesting, but don't form a cohesive strategy and therefore don't deliver. And given how resource constrained we all are in financial authorities, we can't afford to do that. Another consideration for me, and this is a bit old school, is to really consider people, processes, as well as the technology. and make sure, you know, I know we've spoken about data, but yeah, data has to be in there. Again, the temptation with a subtext strategy is to pick some shiny dashboard thing to do and make it about the technology, whereas actually it may be so much more about fixing the processes first, or realigning processes before subtext can then really add its value. So and also, as we've just been discussing around skills and explainability of AI, there's actually the skill set needed to support a supervisory, a subtext strategy, because some of our supervisors will need to be upskilled. We might need to bring in some new people into a wider supervisory team, some data scientists, specialists, etc. So it really is around people, process, and technology. The other thing, the other consideration that I would like to raise in terms of subtext strategies is to choose your implementation approach. So after you've done your gap analysis and you've prioritized ruthlessly, is to really think about how you want to implement your subtext strategy. Some financial authorities are doing a test and learn approach with smaller increments. Some are, because they have to fit in with an overall budget approach for their financial authority, they have to do a slight hybrid between agile and sort of waterfall because of the way that your or their financial authority is set up. So really need to consider that. Again, if you're going for some nice, you know, shiny things and it's not aligned to the vision or your budget process or your overall transformation process, your subtext strategy isn't going to do justice to all the work that you're putting into it. Final point, final consideration for devising an adequate subtext strategy, I think, is to be prepared to publish it upfront. Get it out there. Share with the public and, you know, with other supervisory bodies what your subtext strategy is, because then you can benefit from inputs from other authorities, from partners, from technology firms, from policymakers. You can also share any pilot outputs so that you can learn from others and others can learn from you. And for me, those are the key considerations for subtext strategies.
Thank you, Galina. That's very interesting and it feeds nicely. I feel like our discussion is flowing very, very well because this feeds nicely into what I wanted to ask Sarah on what are the main challenges then do policymakers in emerging markets and developing economies need to think about in adopting subtext solutions. So they're thinking about their strategy and they're thinking about what to put in there. And there's oh yes, the benefits, great. But what are the main risks and challenges that will be lying ahead of us as we embark on this journey?
Yeah, so again, you know, really amazing alignment with what Galina's saying. So a clear purpose and vision is absolutely key, because otherwise, you know, I mean, the path will be long and winding anyway, but it will be even you know, more winding, and maybe not even meet the objectives if you don't have that clear vision. And it's only when you've got that clear vision that you can articulate what you need. I think so in terms of a purpose and a vision, it's those outcomes that you can then use to assess whether, you know, whether it's via a test and learn approach or another approach. It's the only way you can assess if you're meeting the goals of what you need to do today versus tomorrow. So I think also in terms of technology, and we touched on this a bit earlier, technology should be an enabler. It has an important role to play, but it's not the be-all and end-all by any means. And I think that's often where implementations fall over, because there's such expectations around the technology, but actually perhaps not enough thought has gone into that preparation of people and processes. So Galina is not old school at all. It's absolutely 101. And I think, whereas there's a lot of technology adoption that's needed, it's that long-term adoption strategy that needs to be borne in mind. We have the technology, we have more technology than we actually need, but the actual adoption, embedding, and value extraction from that technology is I feel what the gap is. And so I think the more we understand how to use technology and how to improve those processes and controls, that's going to be the best way going forward.
Thank you very much, Sarah. So I think now we can circle back to why I asked that first question around outsourcing for authorities and why we started on that weird direction. As I asked Sarah her question on around this background on, we know our authorities build and outsource and the development of their RegTech or SupTech solutions. They still need the skills to develop needed to design, use, and maintain and update these solutions. So what critical skills do policymakers need to benefit from RegTech and SupTech, and how can they upskill their regulatory and supervisory specialists in these critical skills? And I'll also throw this question to to Galina as we close off in our last 5 minutes.
Yeah. I think there are specific skills that would be helpful, but in some sense, I think the thing with this area, because it's so wide-ranging, and I think you need that mix of skills. We're going to need a different type of people to support supervisors and regulators. I think that mix of skills is helpful, and having an innovative mindset and an open mindset and one that embraces change. That's a key skill that can be developed and learned. So rather than thinking innovation happens in a department, now I think we all kind of need to embrace that a bit more. I think there's certain change focused skills that would be really beneficial, like that planning, what's the difference between a sort of waterfall versus agile, and what works best, and also how to articulate requirements and processes and controls, and in a simple way, right, that everyone understands, and readiness, onboarding technology and new capabilities, but also being ready to fail quickly and then move on. If it's not meeting an objective, then look outwardly. So yeah, it's that flexibility. So I know that's not a very concrete list of skills, but I think one thing is it's almost like a mindset, but also focusing on transferable skills and collaborating.
I'd agree with Sarah. I think what you've listed there is really compelling, and I think the point that you made about being involved in writing use cases or business requirements is essential, because that's how the skill almost gets transferred across. I'm conscious now that we've got a minute to go, so Nolwazi, I'm going to hand back to you to wrap up.
Thank you very much to both my great panelists. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Galina. I think this has been a very fruitful discussion about thinking about the technical aspects that go behind all of these exciting concepts that are normally just thrown around RegTech, SupTech, but there's deeper things that we need to start thinking about. And you two have had great contributions to our discussion today. And I thank you both for just giving us your time and your insights and sharing them with us. Have a great day, and thank you to our participants.
Thank you for the great questions as well. Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.